Before we start, I would like to inform you that we are recording the presentation for future availability. And regarding questions, I would prefer if you keep them for the end, so we can keep to the schedule of the presentation. So I will just stop the camera right now and start the presentation, since you'll be looking at the slides anyway. Right, so before we go into it, a couple of words about us, just to give you a background of what entitles us to make such webinars. We are IPR-Insights licensing consultants, an independent software asset management consulting company from Central Eastern Europe. We have been working in software licensing for over 19 years. We've engaged in more than 700 software asset management projects and served more than 150 different customers. Companies ranging from 500 employees to 100,000. And just to give you a couple of references, I could state AB InBev, T-Systems, Erste, Richter Gideon, and so forth. Our team consists of more than 30 consultants, which are specialized in the big software producers like as Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, and SAP, and also third-tier vendors like VMware and Adobe, etc. We also support customers that are being audited by software producers, as we have an in-house legal and accounting team. Our work is based on ITIL v3 guide and ISO 19770-1 IT SAM standards. Now, going into SharePoint server licensing. To explain these changes, we would have to understand the basic licensing that exists for SharePoint and the software assurance rules for these solutions. So we will go over the basic licenses rules first. In the slides, we will talk only about SharePoint server as the example, because the same rules mostly apply for project too. If there are any differences between SharePoint and project, we will underline the difference clearly. So SharePoint has a basic Microsoft licensing formula, which is server license plus client access license, which is a CAL. All server instances required to be licensed with one SharePoint server license, and all server access needs a client access license. There are two flavors of client access license, per device or per user. In case we have a device accessing the instance of SharePoint server, we need to allocate a client access license device to that device. When the device is properly licensed, any user that uses that device has the right to access SharePoint server. The same for an user. We need to allocate an user call to the user accessing Microsoft SharePoint server. When a user call is allocated to a user, that user can access SharePoint server from any number of devices. Now, in the past, device client access license were less expensive than user calls. And for this reason, a lot of companies were purchasing device calls. At this moment, they are equally priced. And as device calls are good mostly for shift jobs or very specific kind of departments, for all other cases, a user call is more cost efficient. Especially since in our modern workplace, most users use at least two devices, like a mobile and a laptop, to access SharePoint server. So if you have device calls that are used by users in your agreement, you may change them at your agreement renewal if you have software assurance for the device calls. So let's just hope there is no Microsoft audit until you get to the renewal. So basically, this is the licensing for SharePoint and all Office productivity server licensing. Things get a little more complicated in a virtual server environment, though. So let's talk about server license reallocation rules and license mobility software assurance benefit. By default, all volume licenses can be reallocated from one device to another every 90 days. Another very important definition that is misunderstood by a lot of customers from our experience is that the license server is always the physical server, even if you are running SharePoint into a virtual machine. For example, if a SharePoint server is running in the virtual machine, the license is allocated to the underlying physical server. When a virtual machine running SharePoint server moves from one physical server to another inside the cluster, the user might think there is no impact on licensing because the virtual operating environment is the same. But that's not true. As the license is actually allocated to the physical server, it can follow the virtual machine, but only once every 90 days. So if the VM moves more than one time in 90 days, then the license cannot follow the moving virtual machine to another physical environment. In the instance of a virtual machine that automatically moves between multiple physical servers, we must provide each affected physical server with an appropriate license. The licensing required for virtual machines moving between multiple physical servers is multiplied by the number of the physical servers running it. This means that in this scenario, SharePoint server needs 3 SharePoint server licenses. You basically need to license each physical server in the cluster. And this is because of these two important rules and definitions. The license can move once per 90 days, and the license server is always the underlying physical server, even if you are running the software in a virtual machine. Here is where the benefit of software assurance comes into play, in the form of license mobility that overrides the 90 days reallocation rule. If the VM moves to another server inside the cluster, the license with SA can follow it at any times, over and over again. So for a license with software assurance, there is no need to multiply the license requirement by the number of physical servers due to the VM moving between physical servers. So what has changed? In the product terms of SharePoint and project server, which were added last year in November, I think, this paragraph was added. So let's take it apart. First, it says active software assurance is required to run and access SharePoint Server Subscription Edition software. So software assurance must be purchased for both SharePoint Server license and client access licenses in order to run SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. Coming back to the name, Subscription Edition, this, as you can see, it's somewhat misleading because software assurance is included in a subscription usually. So here it says clearly that you need to buy software assurance for SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. Next, it says SharePoint Server Subscription Edition licenses include a perpetual entitlement to run SharePoint Server 2019 software only. Meaning that despite the name Subscription Edition, if you don't buy software assurance with it, you can use the perpetual SharePoint Server 2019 version only. And after that, if software assurance coverages lapses or customer purchases a buyout license, customer must uninstall Subscription Edition software and may install version 2019. Now, just to clarify, the buyout license can come out of a subscription-based agreement like enterprise agreement subscription or open volume license subscription agreement. You can buy them out at the end of the agreement and transform them into perpetual license, but they don't inherit software assurance, so you have to buy it separately. So that is that. If you don't acquire software assurance with SharePoint Server Subscription Edition, you need to uninstall and install 2019 version. So let's dig deeper. Previously, software assurance provided usage rights for the new main version. So, for example, if you had SharePoint Server 2013 and you bought SA, software assurance, for it as well, then when 2016 was released, you got usage rights for 2016. When 2019 was released, you got usage rights for 2019. This was the model before. So if your SA would expire here, you are entitled to use 2013. If it expires here, you are entitled to use 2016, which is, pretty easy to follow. But with the release of the subscription edition, the traditional major version release will disappear. Something similar to what they have done with Windows Desktop Operating System 10. Even if they name it 10 and now 11, these are not major versions like Windows XP or Windows 7 were. So there won't be a SharePoint Server 2022 or 2025. It will always be the so-called subscription edition, which means that if we buy today SharePoint Server Subscription Edition perpetual license with software assurance and choose not to renew the software assurance after a number of years, we have to go back to 2019 version. So if I let the SA drop here, I stay on 2019. If I let the SA drop 2 or 4 years later, then I have to go back to 2019 as well. Right now, it is not a big problem because the 2019 version is not an old product. But later it can be a problem because without software assurance, the 2019 version will receive bug fixes and security updates on a monthly basis until January 2024. After that, it will get only security updates. So after 2026, it can be a security risk to keep SharePoint Server 2019 in your environment. The option of the so-called extended security update, that was quite expensive anyway, won't really be an option because in order to get that, you need SA to begin with. So with software assurance, you will receive monthly bug fixes and security updates, just like without SA. But you also receive future updates. So there won't be any new major versions, but instead, each year, the futures updates will make a build that will have a number and that you can choose to stay on rather than immediate update to the latest build. The immediate effect of these changes will be to add more pressure to the end user to buy software assurance. Now, like in a lot of cases, Microsoft licensing allows for an alternative licensing for SharePoint and Project Server. So, for example, you can choose not to buy client access license for SharePoint Server and instead get SharePoint Server Online Plan 1 or Plan 2, Standard or Enterprise as CAL equivalents. With these plans, the user can access on-premise installations of Microsoft SharePoint as well. And this will always be a subscription, so it's an OPEX. You can also buy Office 365 E1 Standard or E3, E5 Enterprise. And also you can buy M365 E3 or E5 as alternatives. In this case, if your users have one of these subscriptions, you don't have to buy CALs for them and you don't have to keep the SA for it, as these are subscriptions. As we saw in the product terms rule, to use the SharePoint subscription edition, you have to keep software assurance for the client's access licenses as well, not only for the server license. For Project Server, there is a difference here, meaning that there are project CALs alternatives as well, like the Project Online Essentials and Plan 1 to 5. This allow to access on-premise installation of Project Server. Also, the Project Professional Device Application license with SA gives a device-based CAL for this device as well, There is also alternative for the server license, and that is the M365 Enterprise E3 or E5. Now, here is the catch with this. If all of the users accessing SharePoint Server on-premise have M365 or E3 subscription, then the server access by them don't need server licenses. Okay. If only one of the users have any type of other client access license, so beside M365, E3, or E5, then the servers still need to get server licenses. Great. And with this, we conclude the SharePoint and Project Server Subscription Edition licensing webinar. If you are interested in further developing software licensing knowledge, I'm glad to inform you that about our IPR-Insights License Academy series, which consists of a 6 hours in-depth, over 2 years spread licensing learning of a specific vendor. The course is led by my colleagues, which are veteran software asset management consultants. And based on the knowledge acquired in the License Academy, the lecturers can take an exam that, if passed, will provide a certified professional qualification in the form of an e-badge that can be posted on virtual profiles. Please see the dates of the License Academy courses on the slide. Our next webinar will be presented by Attila Posta, which is our SAP Business Unit Manager at IPR-Insights. It's on the 25th of March, this week, and it will touch the hottest topic right now around SAP, which is S/4HANA migration. Thank you for your attention. Please use my email address to send any questions that you might have, or if you'd like to discuss anything right now, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Okay, great. So please just send the questions by email or anything, and hopefully we'll catch you again in our future webinars. Thank you again.
Thank you, Octavian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Octavian. Have a nice day.
Same
Bye-bye.
to you.
Bye-bye.